Hello and welcome. Ghana's media has traveled from the era of the culture of silence to becoming the voice of the people. But the quality of the content churned out has raised concerns about the falling standards of the media in Ghana. Good afternoon. I'm Francisca Kakra-Forson. Today we have a conversation about media content in Ghana, and we'll have a chat with the Information Minister Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah. Join us. Welcome again. This is Good Afternoon Ghana with me, Francisca Kakra-Forson. Today we are looking at Ghana's media and the content we've been churning out over the past years. Before we get into our conversation, first take a look at this short report we put together looking at how Ghana's media has evolved and up to the current state.
Ghana has had a long tradition of state ownership and control of the media, as far back as the period of independence. It was during the colonial era that the cornerstone of the Ghanaian were laid. The First Republic under Kwame Nkrumah strongly discouraged any kind of privatization of the media through censorship and repressive laws such as the Preventive Detention Act, the PDA, and limiting newspaper licensing to only those within the government. Governments that followed, such as the National Liberation Council, the Busia, Limans, were more liberal and deregulated the media space. The lifting of bans on journalists and the establishment of an independent press council under the Liman government entered the Fourth Republic, the era of media liberalization, where Jerry John Rawlings repealed many of the prohibitive laws he had introduced hitherto. As part of the political liberalization of the time, the media opened up to private participation, breaking the state monopoly. Gradually, the culture of silence of the media saw its death after private radio Joy FM was given a license to operate in 1995. The icing on the cake was the repeal of the criminal libel and seditious laws in 2001, which has been used to curtail press freedom by incarcerating journalists. But this freedom being enjoyed in the Ghanaian media space has once again come under criticism, and the rise of social media complicates the problem. Many have blamed what they say is the falling standards of the media on the fact that it is an open playing field for patronage and arbitrariness. The electronic media, particularly TV, are the biggest offenders displaying unwholesome content, including violence, sexualized content, and the activities of money doublers. Many Ghanaians have called for the regulation of media content in the country.
That's another bill that's going to be coming before the House, and the minister, that's under the Ministry of Information. The Minister for Information has served notice that he will be engaging the Parliamentary Select Committee. I was part of the stakeholder consultation that happened, but that was a larger consultative thing. We would sit down with the ministry before the bill is laid to have a look at the broadcasting bill. I think it's important we have a broadcasting bill. It's going to help us regulate some of the operations and deal with the lacuna and uncertainty surrounding issues of the NMC and their role in enforcement, especially protection of media houses and journalists, dissemination of disinformation, and all of those kind of issues will be dealt with adequately. So the broadcasting bill is a good step to be taken, but we would like to look at it, scrutinize it, and be sure that it serves the best interest of all stakeholders: the state, the journalists, and the Ghanaian people who are the end users. Let's not put the cart before the horse. The broadcasting bill ought to deal with such issues. Should we be seeing spiritualists and money doublers on our TV? I hold a personal view that no, that's irresponsible journalism. Okay, but how do you enforce that? How do you make sure that it is well enforced? That's what we need to have a broadcasting bill to deal with. And so, yes, it's not an attempt to regulate or stifle religious broadcast, but we need to have religious broadcast within certain parameters and be clear what is religious broadcast and what crosses the line. We need to draw a line in the sand, and that's what we're going to do. Do you want to see pastors kicking pregnant women in the stomachs? Do you want to see pastors claiming that they are lying on people's wives to take out spirits from them? Is that religious broadcast? Has that crossed a certain line? Those are the issues that I think we want to look at. And I think that with the broadcasting bill, we'll be able to address those issues.
I believe media content in Ghana should be controlled because it should help the younger ones to grow better, because there are some things that are shown on various TV stations that are not helpful to the youth. So I believe it should be controlled so as to curb a lot of conflict or violence that happens in the country.
When these media platforms are regulated and they're not giving them much freedom they have now, it will maybe bring them onto their senses so that they wouldn't allow any form of things that can affect the young ones coming.
It should be controlled either from Ghana or anywhere in the country, because children are also watching. Other people who are not supposed to be watching certain things which are shown on TV are still watching. So I think if they are not controlled, they can go a long way to harm the society and then children coming up, because children, when they are growing up, they take inspiration from the things they watch. So if they are not controlled and they are allowed to watch just anything, I think it will harm their future. So yeah, media content should be controlled by the government and then media houses as well.
Media content, sometimes it will be very difficult to control because the TV stations and both the media houses is private entity. So for government to control it or for individuals to control it, you cannot have to stand in between it. Because looking at the content being showed now, I think most of the media houses also are looking at the commercial purposes of it. But I think regulating it sometimes will help.
Looking at the kind of things that they show on the TV, they also display on the other platforms, especially by these ritualists and those people who come that they are doubling money, and maybe the radio stations that host them.
So in lieu of this, the Information Ministry and its other stakeholders held a consultative forum to discuss broadcast content, regulating broadcast content in Ghana, as well as the draft broadcasting bill. Here are excerpts.
Of a parent broadcasting law, it would not be prudent enough to translate the standards on broadcasting into regulations. Now, in the absence of a clear, certain legal framework to go, I think that the public had come under the assumption that when they read Article 1678, which says that the National Media Commission shall take all appropriate measures, and they are thinking all appropriate means anything that they want to do. What they forget is that there are different modes of appropriateness. For instance, engaging in dialogue is an appropriate means of bringing sanity into the media environment. That does not require any enforcement. And so there are guidelines. Now, guidelines thrive on self-regulation.
The very constitutional architecture of the nation even requires that there is in place a legal regulatory framework that not only gives vent to the expression of media rights and other freedoms of the media, but also puts in place reasonable limitations for the exercise of those rights. And I'll refer to Article 21. We all know that Article 21, Clause 1, grants to the media freedom of expression, to all citizens of Ghana freedom of expression, and also grants to us the freedom of information. But then in the same Article 21, we find in Clause 4, Paragraph E, the permission to impose reasonable limitations in accord with public order, morality, and health of the nation. Then you go to the specific chapter on the media, Article 162 and 163, bolster the rights of the media. But again, in Article 164, there is the permission to impose restrictions in the interest of public order, public morality, and for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. So you see that the Constitution itself recognizes that there ought to be reasonable limitations imposed by law, and those laws definitely ought to be on the basis of public order, public morality, and the protection of the rights and freedoms of reputations of others. Yes. But in this country, you see that there's an absence of a specific legislation which gives expression to the reasonable limitations that ought to be imposed in accordance with public order, public morality, and the protection of rights and reputations of others. And I think that this absence, of course, is not only in the area of the media. Parliament has even failed to act, especially in areas relating to the Article 181 obligation. There's an obligation on the part of Parliament to enact laws that will regulate the Article 181 obligation of the state. That has not been done. So clearly, it is the nation on the part of Parliament that is responsible for where we are. But it is not too late in the day at all. And I think, as the Minister for Communications indicated, the time to do so.
We'll go for a break right now, but we'll come back with more. Stay with us. Welcome back to Good Afternoon, Ghana. So we'll have one more excerpt from the consultative meeting by the Information Ministry, and then we'll get on with our conversation.
On communications, representatives of the Central Bank, the Chair and members of the National Media Commission, officers from the National Communication Authority, our colleagues from the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, President and representatives of the Ghana Journalists Association, representatives of the National Cybersecurity Center, representatives of the National Film Authority, our colleagues in the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I join the Chief Director in welcoming all of you to this consultative meeting. I am grateful that all of you have responded favorably to our invitation to join us to urgently address some of the current challenges on our broadcasting landscape. Ghana's democracy has been described by many across the globe as a shining example on the African continent. Key to its architecture are the freedoms that are provided for in the Constitution 1992 for persons within the Ghanaian jurisdiction. These include the rights to free thought and free expression under Chapter 5, and the rights and practice of free media provided for under Chapter 12. In particular, the framers of our Constitution and our forebears had a special place for media in our democracy and our national life. Over the years, Ghana has worked to deepen these freedoms by, for example, repealing the Criminal Libel Law, and quite recently, enacting a Right to Information Act aimed at providing a freer space for public discourse.
So that's the Minister for Information, Kojo Oppong Nkrumah. Later, I'll be having a more detailed conversation with him, but let's first look at the outcomes from the consultative meeting. So the agenda really was to look at regulatory collaboration to address unethical broadcast content. How did they plan to achieve this? One, stakeholders will sign up to a memorandum of cooperation with 14 days of meeting, formalizing arrangements for action. Two, key to the arrangements is the setting up of the joint stakeholder group as a committee of the National Media Commission in accordance with Section 10 of the NMC Act 1993. Three, membership of the committee will include the National Media Commission, National Communications Authority, National Security Secretariat, the Bank of Ghana, Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, the Ghana Journalists Association, and the Office of the Attorney General. The work of the committee is to, among other things, monitor the broadcasting landscape to identify and examine complaints of unethical broadcast content. B, provide an early warning system for flagging such unethical content. Also, what was recommended? So recommend appropriate remedies to relevant regulators, including recommendations for the issuance and publication of warnings recommendations for the suspension of frequency authorization by the NCA, and recommendations for the withdrawal of frequency authorization by the NCA. The second agenda was the draft broadcasting bill. And the minister is here. We'll get into that and have a conversation on that. Yes, good afternoon to you, Kojo Oponkrumah.
Good afternoon.
For joining us.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well, very well.
Yes, I want us to start off from, you know, this task force or joint group that the stakeholders who met on Friday 16th put together. Let's look at their role, really. What role are they going to do? And is it from this time till when there's a broadcasting bill, or will they continue to exist after? Give us that understanding.
So let me just backtrack a little.
Okay.
There are two challenges that we're trying to deal with. First is the challenge of regulatory collaboration in dealing with what is believed to be unethical broadcast content on our airwaves, even as I'm speaking to you this afternoon. And that has become necessary because if you look at the legal architecture for regulating the information space or the media space, we have two primary regulators: the National Media Commission that deals with content and standards, and the National Communication Authority that deals with frequency authorization for those who want to use spectrum. In many parts of the world, there is only a single regulator that does both jobs. So in the UK, for example, you might find the Ofcom doing both jobs. In some other jurisdictions, a single entity. In other jurisdictions, you have two entities, but the relationship between those entities is clearly defined. And therefore, they know when to collaborate and to work together. Unfortunately, in the Ghana situation, that clarity has not been seen over the years. And that is why you'll find that the NCA will give frequency authorization to somebody to broadcast. The NMC may be unhappy with what they are broadcasting, but that's where it ends. And even if the NMC makes recommendations or gives them orders to whether it's to retract or to do something, they can choose not to do it, and there can be no consequence. So the first part of our job was to bring all of these 13 stakeholders together and have a conversation to say, within the existing legal architecture, how can you work together? And I'm very happy to reiterate what you have just read, that they agreed that Section 10 of the NMC Act allows the NMC to set up a committee of persons from the NMC and from outside. And what they are going to do, therefore, is to have this Section 10 committee with everybody on board to examine reports against content or to on their own examine content and make the necessary recommendations either to the NMC itself or to the NCA. And when they find, for example, that there's content on the platforms that is inappropriate or unethical, the first option is to make recommendations for warnings to be issued, where you have some recalcitrants to move from the warnings to suspension by the NCA, because the NCA can suspend or withdraw, as I'm sure in the last 24 hours you may have noticed that there are some exercises in that space. But we do not want the NCA to be acting... You're referring to the arrest and shutdown of Nanagra television station. But that is principally because it is operating without authorization. Not necessarily because of the content. It is not even a matter of content. But you don't want the SCA to be going into areas of content. You want the NCA to stick to their spectrum regulation. Okay. Now, under this new framework, if it's a matter of content, the NMC committee can make that determination and make a recommendation that we think the content is out of gear, we think it's unethical, we think it's against the pillars of Article 164 based on maybe the GJ standards or on some other standards, and therefore we're asking you to act. And then NCA can invoke its powers to either suspend or to even withdraw the frequency authorization. That is one part of the challenge. The other part of the challenge is how to have a broadcasting act which, among other things, spells out the relationship between these regulators and deals with some residual matters. And work has also started on that broadcasting. So that the expectation will be that the broadcasting bill will bring this clarity between the NCA and the NMC. Yes. Okay, now let's look at this joint stakeholder group where we understand that it's going to be under the NMC
and will invoke the powers of the NCA.
Yes.
Let us understand.
Where necessary, yeah.
So where invoking the powers of the NCA will amount to what?
It will amount to, no, it will amount to making a recommendation to the NCA that we find that the content coming from this particular station is against, for example, national security interests. I'll give you an example. In the case of Radio Tong in the Volta region, which was promoting the works of secessionist activities, the NCA on its own found that it was acting in a manner that was against national security interest. It was on a prompting by the National Security Secretariat, and they proceeded to act. When the operators of that station went to court, I think the Tong court, or I think the whole court, for example, the courts threw them out and agreed with the NCA. As right as the NCA got it in that instance, we think it's a dangerous precedent, because tomorrow, if you allow the NCA to be purporting to make judgment calls on content propriety, you may have an NCA that may stretch its arm a bit too far. The constitutional body responsible for media standards, media promotion, etc., is the NMC.
The NMC. And don't you think that this stakeholder group is going to be doing what the NMC should have done?
Well, the NMC, when it comes to, let's say, journalists, the highest journalistic standards as they do, has the opportunity to examine in connection with the GJ ethics and make a pronouncement. But not all media content is journalism. There is media content that goes beyond journalism. But because it is in the media space, you want the media ombudsman, that is the NMC, to be the one to make the determination. But it is also equally important to have all the other stakeholders at that NMC table. So take currency. The Bank of Ghana is the one that is responsible for printing our currency. It's literally the custodian for our currency. You have people on television literally doubling or purporting to double our currency. But the Bank of Ghana may not have power to go and, let's say, shut down a television station. The Bank of Ghana, being a member of this multi-stakeholder committee, has the opportunity to have this matter examined there. And if this committee is of the view that it is in breach of those standards, they will draw the attention of the NCA and invoke the NCA power. So the NCA will be the one that will now say that under Act 769, we gave you this authorization. We are satisfied based on the recommendation from the National Media Commission that is responsible for content, that the content that you are churning out is X or Y or Z, and therefore we are proceeding to either suspend or to withdraw your frequency authorization. Okay,
you mentioned the Bank of Ghana as being part of this committee or this stakeholder group. There are also other state agencies, for instance, the National Security Secretariat.
Yes. Because we envisage, if I just may, that in another instance where you have another Radio Tone situation, you don't want the NCA on its own or national security on its own to purport to act. You want them to draw the attention of the content operator or the content regulator, that is the NMC, to explain to it whatever reasons for which, because, you know, for example, there's work of fiction that can be expressed through media. Some works of fiction could even border on some interests. But you don't want, for example, the National Security Secretariat to sit in their offices and say that we think that this, though it's fiction, borders on national security, therefore we have taken it off. You want the body properly charged with media regulation in terms of content to examine it and say, yes, we hear you, but this is fiction, this is entertainment, this is not content which can be believed to be against national security interests, and not to agree with them. But where they choose to agree with them, then to draw the attention of the National Communication Authority that it is in breach of Act 769 and therefore should be taken off the air.
So you also have the Office of the Attorney General, GJA, the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association.
These are the owners of the stations.
Yes, and they had, at the time when the content standards regulation, the LI, had come out, they had said that, and quite recently some men did say that there was no consultation as far as they were concerned with that attempt to regulate the media. So it's interesting that this time around it appears to be a comprehensive kind of consultation. But let's get into the work that this stakeholder group is going to do. You've explained the relevance of their membership, but really on the ground, what are they going to do? How are they going to do the monitoring? What kind of workforce are they going to be using? How will, you talked about reports being sent. How is all of that? Who can report? Is it anybody or there specific
So they have a
people?
14-day period within which they are concluding the articles that will go into this memorandum. In fact, today I think they're having a meeting with the Attorney General's Department to conclude and answer some of these questions that you are talking about. And then by, I think, day 14, they are in a position to tell the country that this is how you report to us, and this is how long we take in doing our work, etc., etc. But broadly speaking, if you look at the National Communication Authority, the National Communication Authority has the capacity to monitor all channels that they have given authorization to today. But they are monitoring, though they get to see the content, their monitoring is more about the utilization of the spectrum that has been given to them. The NMC, over the years, has not been resourced enough and does not have that elaborate monitoring system. But in the midst of this collaboration, the NCA monitoring system is able to serve those purposes of the NMC at this point in time. So when they tell us that this is how we can report to them, what we do is then, if we have a challenge, we draw their attention. They will collaborate and have an opportunity to view it or to listen to it and have all of these key actors sitting around the table and come to a determination that, yes, indeed, this is unethical content, and therefore they are proceeding to make the relevant recommendations.
So I want to take you, because you mentioned the Nana Agradaa arrest. So will this be the work of the committee, no, or we are still waiting for their 14 days?
That station or that broadcast platform, according to the brief I have, was not even authorized in the first place to operate. So it was a pirate station that was operating. So that does not fall in the ambit of the work that we are doing. We are talking about legitimate, licensed and operating media houses that somebody may have a view to say has gone overboard. Take the UK. So quite recently, I think, what's his name, Pastor Chris Oyakhilome also, was delivering content on television in the United Kingdom. And that content was thought to be unethical. People had the opportunity to report to Ofcom. Ofcom had the opportunity to do an investigation and found that indeed it was unethical content and fined him for it. I think in the last 24 hours there have been similar instances from Ofcom as well.
There was this was a radio broadcast where there was
music of a sexual connotation being
yes,
played, and they've had occasion to investigate and come out with a report on it.
Yes.
So all over the world.
Are we going to see something like that?
Well, it depends on how we frame the final structures in the broadcasting law proper.
Okay.
But for the structures as we have as of now, what will happen in such an instance is that you draw the attention of the NMC committee to it. They have everybody around the table and have an opportunity to do an investigation. They may come out and say that this is what they found, they don't agree with the complaint that you've made, or they agree with the complaint that you've made, and therefore they are drawing the attention of the broadcast platform or are issuing a warning and publishing same. And where you have recalcitrance, they may decide to draw the attention of the NCA that you gave this frequency to this entity. It is involved in this kind of content publication. We have drawn their attention, they continue to persist. We think you should also draw their attention on frequency lines, that you share our view, and that if they persist, you will take action against their frequency. Assuming they continue, you have opportunity to actually even withdraw their
Very well. Pardon me, let me take you back to the Nana Agradaa conversation. So what else do we know? She's been arrested, the TV station shut down. What is she going to be charged with? What's going to happen next?
I do understand that there's an active investigation ongoing on it now. Some evidence has been gathered already. It's not our policy to speak to ongoing investigations. But the brief that we have is that, I won't even call it a TV station, that this entity was broadcasting without authorization. That would be in breach of Act 769. It will also be in breach, I think, of the Electronic Communications Act. And at this stage, those investigations are taking place. When they are done and they have assessed the evidence they have against this person and her entity, they will be in a position to inform us of the charges they intend to prefer against her.
Okay. Now, back to the joint stakeholder group. What's the estimation of their existence? For how long are they going to be there?
Well, so we're trying to deal with a gray area we have now. And the reason is that when you take a bill to Parliament, as the executive, from the day you lay it before Parliament, you no longer have control over it. Parliament is the one that determines whether it will pass it or not, or how long it will take in passing it. So during that, from now until whenever it is passed, we cannot just throw our hands in the air and say we are waiting and hoping that Parliament will pass legislation to this effect. So we're expecting that as a first step, this joint stakeholder committee will exist at least until the broadcasting law is passed. And I just want to be very clear, at least. It is possible that in the construction of the broadcasting law, the stakeholders, as they are submitting their memos to us, may even come to a certain position that they want this committee to remain in permanence and to continue this job moving forward under the new legal framework. So I can't give timelines now. I'm just explaining the possibilities, but we'll see how it goes.
And what kind of, so should the committee begin their work after their 14 days, what kind of sanctions will be given to, broadcasters found culpable? Will it be what the law has already prescribed?
Absolutely. They cannot do anything outside the law. The challenge is that today the law is, if I may use the expression loosely, dispersed. You have some provisions sitting in the National Communications Authority Act. You have some sitting in the NMC Act. And if we did not find a smart way to bring all of them together to fashion out how they can work using the various tools, everybody will be doing what you heard 2 weeks ago. I don't have power to act. This is not in my domain. I don't have the power to monitor all of this, etc., etc. I've spoken to them. They are not members of GIBA, etc. Now, they are all working together under a Section 10 committee of the NMC and then can fall on each other's piece of legislation through this collaboration. What
definition of unethical content is the joint stakeholder group going to be working with?
You're asking me to predict what they will come up with. It's a bit difficult for me to do because they are now going in to do their work. But suffice to say that today, if you look at some of the pieces of legislation, it tells you what we don't want to see on our platforms. That's a starting point. So if you take for journalism, proper journalism, the GJA has a code of ethics, which ordinarily, if you went to complain at the NMC Complaints Committee against journalism, be it in print, online, or on broadcast platforms, they would use the GJA code of ethics to determine whether this piece of journalism is ethical or not. I've had occasion to report journalists to the NMC Complaints Committee, and that was the instrument that was used. But as I've mentioned earlier, media broadcast or media content goes beyond journalism. And that is why you find that under Article 164 of our Constitution, it will say that we have freedoms of expression and thought and media, but those freedoms can be fettered on grounds of national security, public morality, public order, or
public health,
on actions that go against the reputations, rights, and responsibilities of other citizens. And so it is within this framework that you're expecting the committee to be working. Also, if you go into the NCA Act, I think Act 769, it spells out the kind of content you cannot be broadcasting through the medium that they give you authorization. For example, charlatanic advertising, false news, and then it has a whole list there. So they are going to be working within the various sets of rules that are available. Else, it is not in one person's books, and therefore he will say, I don't have the power to act. It's not within my
Because I remember about 2-3 weeks ago on Saturday on Inside Pages, you gave a list of a lot of existing legislature tackling this.
And that's why we're making the case that there is enough law now to deal with what is happening now.
But it appears they're looking at different directions.
Because though there are enough laws, the laws were not conjunct in any way. And so you have the NMC responsible for content, but all of these things in the NCA Act, they are not in the NMC Act. And the things in the Constitution, they are not in the NMC Act. And so if the NMC is standing alone and trying to work, it cannot work with those pieces of legislation. But I think the beauty, and for me it's a test case in policy making, is that by getting all of them around the table and saying, we hear all the arguments, but this is the nature of the beast we are confronted with. Can we come together within the legal infrastructure and find a solution? I think it's been interesting that they have found a solution. In fact, I congratulated them that as I was entering the consultative forum, I did not have an answer. And I mean, I say it without any shame. I was pleased to learn when they themselves, in the heat of the conversation, when the cameras were off and everybody was out of the room and we were disagreeing, they themselves came up with the point that, but there's a Section 10 committee we can use. Why don't we all go under the Section 10 committee? And they all, gradually came around it. And I think that's the beauty of what we can achieve.
What role did the Attorney General play in this?
Well, so go back to LI 2224. And I'll extend your question to be, what role did the Attorney General, or let's say the judiciary, because the Chief Justice was invited, he sent a Justice of the Court of Appeals, Justice Essar, to be with us. What role did they play? Go to LI 2224. In the end, the Supreme Court recognized that what the National Media Commission sought to do, which is to have standards for broadcast content, was not out of place. It was not unconstitutional. The path they chose and the instrument they chose were unconstitutional. So, for example, they tried to use a legislative instrument to fetter the rights in the grand norm, the Constitution. And lawyers will tell you that that's a strange thing to attempt to do.
So what, you need a parent
act? At least a parent act, at least a substantive piece of legislation. And so the Supreme Court in the ruling draws their attention to the fact that they can go under Article 164 and have a substantive piece of legislation, not an LI. Again, the Supreme Court draws their attention to the fact that the approach that they used, which is to have what you may call prior authorization, that come and show me what you want to publish before I give you permission to go and publish it, else you have committed an offense, amounts to censorship. In fact, it defeats freedom of media. Sometimes when people say media freedom, actually what they think is that the media are free to say and do anything and nobody can even ask them anything or exact sanctions for what they have said. But media freedom is a very technical term. When you study media freedom, what it means is that nobody can dictate to you what to say or stop you from what you are saying or publishing. But when you are done publishing, if there are consequences, they can be exacted on you, and that will not be in breach of media freedom. So media freedom is about prior restraint or prior approval. It does not mean that post your publishing or publication, you are excused from any liability. So for example, if you publish defamatory material, you are free to publish it. But if the person offended by it chooses to sue you for $1 million, that suit will not be, you can't go to court and say, we have media freedom, so I have a right to say what I said. But
back to the Giba versus NMC case that you were talking about, another concern, or some of the clauses that they had challenges with, as you mentioned, was the approval that was required.
Yes, the prior approval.
The prior approval. There was also the concern about a possible fine or imprisonment, jail term for defaulters, which really would be taking us back to the era of the culture of silence.
Or of the criminal libel laws.
Exactly.
In those days. And I think all of those came into the contemplation of the Supreme Court to shoot it down.
Kojo, let's look at blogging and social media. Okay. Yes, broadly in the broadcasting bill, but with the stakeholder group.
Yeah.
There's an expectation that as you're going to be monitoring what the media is putting out, social media will also be considered and blogging will also be considered. So bloggers will publish a story online. Social media, anybody with an account can just put something, publish a content about somebody or whatever, something that could even be a national security threat. So how, yes, they've not started their work, but just give us an idea how some of these things will be looked at.
So today, the work that this NMC committee is seeking to do will fit within the existing legal framework. Anything that exists outside the existing legal framework cannot be taken care of by even the work of the committee. All they are doing is that they are collaborating within the current legal framework. The very brilliant questions you are asking are about things that are outside the current legal framework, and those become what we call the emerging issues that we have put before the stakeholders to join us in exercising our minds about. For example, when you take even broadcasting, the traditional definition of broadcasting refers to the use of spectrum, radio and TV. So technically, OTT or IP broadcasting, that is internet-based broadcasting, will not qualify. Here's what it means. That the things that, even if broadcasting standards regulation were in the country and functioning properly, that you cannot do on TV and on radio, you could do it online and get away with it. That is what it technically means now. So one of the questions we've raised before the broadcasting stakeholder platform is that should the definition of broadcasting be extended to include OTT or IP broadcasting? Because it's the same content. Sometimes we're on television. Indeed, that's why we're here. There are sometimes that I have watched your show
we are
online.
Streaming
Absolutely.
live on
So assuming there are broadcast standards about what we can't do on TV, it means that we could do it online and there will be no consequence. For example, take newspaper publication in this country. You are required by law to register with the National Media Commission, not to get a license, but to register. But for online publications, there's no such requirement. So here's what happens.
So the status quo continue?
You can register an IP address anywhere and start publishing online, and you will not be in breach of the existing law, because the existing law only deals with newspapers and other like publications.
Will the broadcasting bill then consider this?
This is one of the issues we have raised, that what are their thoughts? It's because there are consequent questions to it. The spirit of why you register with the NMC is that if somebody therefore has a view that you have had your freedom of media to publish, but what you have published is in breach of X or Y or Z, he can report you to the NMC, and the NMC will have jurisdiction to invite you and conduct an investigation and make a pronouncement and even ask you to maybe go and withdraw or retract or apologize for that publication, or actually agree with you that there was nothing wrong with your publication. Now fancy a situation where I have my www.something, it has no registration with NMC. What is the basis on which the NMC is inviting me to come and answer questions on what I've published? Unless the person offended wants to go under defamation publicly or some other thing, the NMC has no jurisdiction over it. So then you've created two sets of rules. So should they all be treated equally? And then you can even go a bit further. There's another question that I think was raised, very interesting question. That so should the NMC, because in the area of general broadcast, radio and TV, under the framework currently, or even the working committee, if the NMC draws your attention to the fact that this material you are publishing is against section this or section that, and ask you to withdraw and apologize, or maybe to withdraw, or to publish a rejoinder, and you decline, if you are in the broadcast space, under this framework, they could recommend to the NCA that your authorization be suspended, or if it is something that is persisting and is of a danger to the public, that your authorization should be withdrawn. Now, for URLs, that is in the internet space, that are doing same, URLs are not technically registered, even with the NCA. Should that same rule apply? Therefore, should you ask them to register so that if there's this sort of infringement, just like how you'd have told, because then what you can't do on TV, or what if you did on TV and on radio, you will ask NCA to take him off. If he's doing it on the internet, you can't ask NCA to take him off. So should that also be part of? So there are many emerging issues which we have drawn their attention to.
How about the specific social media such as Facebook and Twitter, where somebody can just publish something?
Yeah, that is even on a very different energy level.
Exactly.
And many jurisdictions are struggling with it. You saw what happened in Australia quite recently, where they had a big tussle with Facebook because they were trying to bring some sanity in that space, and Facebook did not agree. There are two schools of thought on that. One school of thought says that put an obligation on everybody who is publishing on online digital or social media platforms, that they are responsible, for example, for moderating even the commentary that they put out. In other words, today if you activated the phone lines here and somebody were to call you and make defamatory comments or comments that were against national security or public order interest, I can bet my bottom dollar, Francisca, that with your training, what you do is that you will quickly cut that line and then begin to moderate that comment that we have no views.
I have to save my job.
But what it means is that online, you could publish the very same content you published here, and people could be coming in to do commentary, which is just like what the person called in and said, and can repeat that same thing online, and there are no remedies. And there are no obligations on you to even moderate.
Okay.
That is one school of thought. Another school of thought, so that first school of thought says that oblige the publishers to moderate. If you can't moderate, don't publish.
Okay, Kojo, let me take...
The other school of thought, very quickly, is that let the social network service providers like Facebook and Twitter be the ones to be responsible for the moderation. But we have left it out there for them to give us their thoughts, and then we'll formulate it into policy.
But you still have to collaborate in some way, one way or the other.
You would still have to collaborate, but I mean, it is important in policy making to hear what the majority of stakeholders think before you bring down the government.
Very well. Let me take some messages from WhatsApp. Good afternoon. Please kindly ask Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah if sanitizing the media space, TV and radio, is enough to ameliorate unethical behavior without leaving out social media. I hope I read it right. It's quite a mouthful. Honorable Kojo, keep up the good work. Hard-working minister. From Doma, this one says, I'm Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah. I just closed from school and I'm really enjoying the conversation. Kojo, quickly, this is a fair question to ask. I'll ask about what other things do you think the broadcasting bill will be looking at, so sort of a sneak peek into it. And then we want to find out whether we are going to, you know, make some noise, have a fanfare, pass a bill, and then go to sleep, and the bill will gather dust somewhere.
No, they are very legitimate questions, but I think we have to start from first enacting the piece of legislation. My responsibility today as sector minister responsible for this sector, is to ensure that the policy is formulated. But we all have a collective responsibility to ensure that policy after being formulated is implemented. Okay. When the law is enacted, all of us have to play the watchdog role and ensure that it functions. I can assure you that as long as I remain minister, if we pass a piece of legislation to this effect, we will get it to work. The first question was about whether we can achieve much if we don't bring on board social media. I think what we've done is to throw it out to the various stakeholders to tell us their thoughts. And in the multitude of counsel, we'll find wisdom.
What else what other interesting thing will the bill be looking at?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, primarily sharpening the relationship between the regulators, trying to simplify the application processes and then the regulation after you are successfully on air. We also want to promote a lot of local content on our screens because it brings jobs and helps to push the economy further. And so there's a fund that is being created which will attract resources from various places, and it will, among other things, assist you know, the production of local content. We also...
Will that mean, just an intervention, will that mean that you put limits or some quotas on foreign content? Because a lot of local media has...
We intend to do that. We intend to, after speaking to the industry, so how much foreign content must we allow into the... Because, you know, media programs us. What we are seeing, what we are hearing informs what we are wearing, what our proclivities become, what our preferences become. How much foreign content do we want on our local platforms? And how much minimum local content must operators who want to operate in this space be willing to put out there? Okay. So all of these are issues that we intend to deal with under this broadcasting law.
Just quickly, because we're out of time, but just quickly, I just want to get your views on the deputy ministerial. It's not part of today's conversation, but since you're information minister and you speak for the government, the list is out, and there are a few concerns because we see some ministries with 3 deputies, things that people expected the president wouldn't do because he had, what, over 110 ministers.
Yeah, but look at the total number now. It's nowhere near what it was in the first term. No matter how much you cut down, there are some ministries that still require some dedicated attention. Go to energy, one of the key areas. You need somebody to take care of you know, petroleum, somebody to handle power, somebody to handle finance and infrastructure. Go to finance, for example. You have a huge revenue question. This year, you're only raising 72 billion cedis as a year. I mean, as revenue and grants. And you have one deputy minister who's going to be paying attention to revenue. You have one who will be paying attention to budget to ensure that we stay on expenditure lines. You have one who will be, among other things, paying attention to ensure that the financing part of the budget meets its target. Raising up to $5 billion is something that is sometimes beyond one institution even. So there are some specific ministries that require extra hand. Many of the others you will notice have a single deputy. Okay. And we look forward to how it bears fruits.
Well, Minister, thank you so much for joining us here. My guest has been Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah, the Minister for Information. Thank you so much for your time with us here on Good Afternoon Ghana. I'm Francisca Kakra-Forson. Bye-bye.